Welcome to Grimora Stories.
I used to think ghost stories were just old wives' tales, the kind of thing whispered around campfires, designed to scare children into behaving. I laughed at the thought of curses, scoffed at the idea of invisible hands reaching out from the dark. That was before I stumbled across the Bell Witch case, a story so deeply rooted in American history that dismissing it as fiction feels almost impossible. But here's the question I need you to ask yourself before we go any further. Do you believe in witches? Not the fairy tale kind with pointed hats and broomsticks, but the kind that lingers in your home unseen, the kind that whispers your name in the dead of night, the kind that waits for the exact moment your guard is down to tear your world apart. Would you survive if something you couldn't see started whispering your death date? Could you keep your sanity if the voice grew louder day by day until the rest of the town began hearing it too? Most people think they're strong enough, that they'd fight back. But the Bell family discovered the hard way that some battles can't be fought with fists or prayers or even faith. You've heard of the Amityville Horror, the story of the Lutz family fleeing their blood-soaked home. But the Bell Witch came long before Amityville, over a century earlier. And unlike so many ghost stories, this one was documented, witnessed by dozens, maybe hundreds of people. Preachers, neighbors, even the Bell family themselves all testified to the same terrifying events. A spirit that didn't just rattle chains or slam doors, but spoke, attacked, and ultimately claimed the life of a man. That's what makes this story different. This isn't a legend locked away in dusty folklore, or a rumor whispered in some half-forgotten town. This is a case with names, with dates, with voices that still echo if you're willing to listen closely enough. And if you've ever thought of ghost stories as harmless, this one might change that forever. So settle in, because the truth about the Bell Witch is darker, stranger, and far more disturbing than anything you've heard before. Let me take you back to Adams, Tennessee, in the year 1817.
Adams, Tennessee, in the early 1800s, was the sort of place people dreamed of when they spoke of the good life. Far from the clamor of the cities and the chaos of war, it was a patch of land carved out of wilderness, where each sunrise promised honest labor, and each sunset brought the comfort of family gathered close. Imagine endless fields of golden crops swaying in the wind, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves along dirt paths, and the toll of church bells rolling over the hills on Sunday mornings. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, where doors were left unlocked, and where faith seemed to protect you as surely as walls and locks ever could. In the heart of this countryside lived the Bell family. John Bell, a hard-working farmer with a reputation for honesty, had carved his fortune from the soil itself. His land stretched across acres of fertile ground, the pride of Robertson County. By his side was Lucy, his wife, gentle in demeanor and fiercely devoted to her children. Together they raised a large family, the laughter of their sons and daughters ringing through the halls of their farmhouse. To hear the townsfolk speak of them, the Bells were the model of stability. John was prosperous and respected. Lucy was admired for her kindness, and the children were bright, well-mannered, and healthy. Their evenings were filled with warmth, meals shared around a wooden table, stories told by firelight, the comforting sound of the wind brushing against the shutters. There was safety in routine and joy in the ordinary. The farm itself thrived under John's care. Corn, wheat, and tobacco grew in abundance, and the surrounding woods offered hunting and timber. It was the sort of land people envied, the kind that promised generations of prosperity. To live in the Bell household was to know the sweetness of security, the reward of labor, and the peace of a world untouched by greater evils. And yet, in stories like these, happiness is often the first fragile layer to be stripped away. For all their fortune, the Bells were not immune to what stirred in the shadows. They could not hear it yet, not fully, but there were whispers buried in the quiet of their nights, waiting. At first, it seemed like the perfect life, until the nights grew darker. It started with something so small they almost ignored it. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, in the quiet of the Bell household. At first, it was nothing more than a faint scratching, like claws lightly raking across wood. Lucy mentioned it casually to John one evening as she prepared their simple supper, insisting it was probably just a stray animal seeking warmth in the walls. But even as she spoke, the sound continued, irregular and impossible to ignore, echoing through the darkened corners of the farmhouse. Nightfall brought no relief. The oil lamps flickered uncertainly, their flames bending and swaying as if buffeted by some invisible breath. Outside, the woods were alive with the restless whisper of wind, yet it was more than wind, more than the night creatures hunting under the cover of darkness. Somewhere, deep among the trees, an eerie howling arose, distant yet unnervingly precise, carrying a tone that seemed almost deliberate. The children, innocent and curious, were the first to truly notice the oddities. Small Betsy Bell, clutching her doll to her chest, whispered to her father one evening, trembling, "Papa, did you hear that?" John paused, setting down his tools, and listened intently. A knock, soft at first, then insistent, tapped along the timbered walls. Another followed, as if the house itself were tapping back in response. At first, these incidents seemed harmless, even amusing, a family joke waiting to be shared at the breakfast table. But then, the noises became more intrusive, Beds were pulled from sleeping children, blankets flung to the floor by invisible hands. Whispered voices called the family members by name, low and taunting, echoing off the walls in rooms where no one else could have been. Even the simplest acts, like walking down the hallway or entering a quiet room, were now accompanied by a weighty sense of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking their every move. Despite these unnerving occurrences, the Bell family tried to cling to reason. Perhaps it was animals in the attic, mice in the walls, or mischievous neighbors playing tricks. But that explanation did not sit well with everyone. Neighbors who had heard the rumbles and cries on the wind warned John and Lucy that this was no ordinary mischief. They had heard the stories, the accounts of past families who had lived on the land before the Bells, families whose nights had been shattered by invisible tormentors that could not be explained by logic or reason. Each evening, the house seemed to grow colder, shadows stretching unnaturally long across the floorboards. The children began to sleep with trembling breaths, and the adults found themselves pausing mid-step, expecting some unseen hand to brush against their shoulder. The atmosphere thickened, charged with an unseen malevolence that refused to be named. What happened next proved this was no ordinary haunting.
It began as a murmur at first, barely audible above the crackle of the fireplace or the wind rattling the shutters. A voice, faint and indistinct, whispered through the corners of the Bell farmhouse, curling around the furniture, rising and falling like the sigh of some unseen creature. Lucy was the first to notice it clearly. She froze one evening while stirring a pot, her spoon trembling in her hand, and whispered to John, "Do you hear it? Someone's talking." John, skeptical but uneasy, strained his ears, catching only fragments of syllables, disjointed sounds that seemed to evade full comprehension. Then it grew bolder. Words formed, mocking and cruel. "You think you can control this house?" it hissed, the voice sliding from high-pitched giggles into guttural growls, as if 2 or 3 beings were speaking in unison. Sometimes it sang hymns, the notes sour and dissonant, twisting familiar tunes into something grotesque. At other times, it recited scripture, but warped, blasphemous, each phrase designed to unsettle, to remind a family that their faith meant nothing here. The most unnerving part was the tone itself. It shifted unpredictably, sometimes a deep male voice, stern and threatening, sometimes a shrill female timbre, sweet yet venomous, and occasionally both at once, overlapping in impossible harmony. It laughed at arguments, mocked their prayers, and even mimicked their voices, repeating phrases the children had whispered only moments before. Betsy would shiver under her covers, clutching her doll tightly, trembling as the voice echoed, "Yes, little one, I know what you fear." Word of these occurrences spread quickly through the small community. Curious neighbors, some fearful, some skeptical, began visiting the Bell household, watching from the edges of the property as the family endured the entity's torment. They heard the whispers, the strange hymns, the unholy scripture recited in voices that should not exist. Some reported seeing shadows flicker across walls with no source of light. Others claimed the voice followed them down the lane, calling their names even as they fled the property. It was during one of these gatherings that John's neighbor, a preacher from a nearby town, attempted to confront the entity. He raised his Bible and shouted, demanding the spirit reveal itself. For a moment, silence fell, but then a chorus of voices erupted, mocking his commands, repeating every word of his sermon in distorted tones. The crowd gasped. Some fell to their knees in fear, others fled. The house, though small, seemed impossibly vast, filled with a presence that laughed at the very idea of human authority. And if you're listening to this story with headphones tonight, I want you to imagine it. A voice curling around you, slipping between the walls, whispering your name, mocking your every thought. It's intimate, invasive, and completely impossible to ignore. That is the sensation the bells endured night after night, growing more unsettling as time went on. It wasn't content to merely speak. Its speech became a prelude, a signal of the horrors to come. Objects rattled, doors slammed, and the unseen presence began to reach out, brushing against flesh and hair. The voice was only the beginning. Soon, the witch used her hands.
The whispers and mocking voices were merely the prelude. Soon, the Bell family began to experience the witch's presence in ways that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or imagination. It started subtly, a hand brushing against a shoulder while no one was there, a light scratch along the back of an arm, the sensation of someone pressing too close in the darkness. But these small touches quickly escalated into something far more violent. Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, became the primary target of the entity's cruelty. At night, she would awaken to find her hair being yanked from the roots, leaving her scalp stinging and her heart racing in terror. Bruises appeared on her arms and legs, inexplicable in their severity and suddenness, as if invisible fingers were pinching and slapping with deliberate malice. On some nights, she claimed she was pinned to her bed, unable to move, her small body trembling as cold, unseen hands pressed her into the mattress. She would whisper for her mother, but Lucy often found herself frozen by fear, unable to intervene before the force withdrew, leaving only a lingering chill and Betsy's quiet sobs. The attacks did not remain confined to the children. Adults, too, were not spared. John Bell, who had once stood as a figure of authority and stability, found himself assaulted by the unseen entity in his own home. Doors slammed against him without cause. Objects flew from shelves, and more than once he was slapped or scratched while going about his daily chores. The witch seemed to take a particular delight in demonstrating her power over him, her actions almost theatrical, as if mocking the very idea of control. The present's malevolent sense of humor extended even to outsiders. Preachers, confident in their faith and eager to confront the specter, were met with a combination of ridicule and terror. One clergyman tried to read scripture aloud, hoping to banish the entity with holy words. The witch responded by twisting his verses, repeating them in mocking tones, sometimes even chanting them backward. She delighted in snickering at their attempts, making it clear that her power was not to be trifled with. The locals whispered that she could hear their thoughts, knew their weaknesses, and could manipulate their fears for her own amusement. As the incidents escalated, the Bell household became a place of palpable dread. When neighbors came to witness the phenomenon, the attacks grew even more intense. Banging sounds shook the floors, unseen hands tugged at clothing, and the entity's voice, alternating between malevolent laughter and chilling whispers, filled every room. Those who entered the house often left shaken, swearing they had felt invisible fingers brush against their skin or heard their names called from empty corners. It was as if the witch were daring the community to challenge her, relishing their fear as much as the Bell family's suffering. Amid the chaos, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The witch seemed to harbor a personal vendetta against John Bell himself. While the family endured countless nightly assaults, he alone was taunted in ways that suggested deep, calculated malice. She mocked his decisions, whispered threats directly in his ear, and seemed to focus her attacks with intent, leaving the rest of the family slightly spared in comparison. Some speculated that the entity was not random in her wrath, that her fury was specifically tied to John, rooted in past grievances that no living person could fully explain. And so, the Bell home, once a sanctuary of warmth and family, became a theater of horror. Each night brought new assaults. Each day offered no reprieve. The witch's cruelty was relentless, unbound by morality or reason, leaving the Bells in a state of constant terror. Every corner of the house seemed haunted, every shadow a potential threat, and every whisper a reminder that their tormentor was always watching, always waiting. But why them? Why John Bell? Some believed it was more than a ghost. It was revenge. As the attacks on the Bell family intensified, the small community of Adams was thrown into a whirlwind of speculation. Some whispered that the events were nothing more than hysteria, a collective imagination fueled by fear and isolation. Others feared there was something far darker at work. Witchcraft, perhaps, or the intervention of a malevolent force beyond human comprehension. The line between superstition and reality blurred with each new incident, leaving townsfolk uneasy in their own homes and questioning the safety of familiar roads and fields. It was during this period that a name began to surface repeatedly: Kate Batts. She was a reclusive woman, rumored to dabble in dark practices, often seen muttering incantations in the woods near the Bell property.
Locals claimed she had a grudge against John Bell, a past grievance that no one could fully explain. Some went so far as to suggest that the spirit tormenting the Bells was none other than Kate herself, or the embodiment of her anger given life. Most chilling of all, the entity allegedly referred to itself as Kate in whispers and mocking tones, taunting the family with a familiarity that suggested intimate knowledge. The more the phenomenon unfolded, the more it became clear that this was not a typical haunting. The entity seemed to operate under its own set of rules. It knew secrets the Bells had never spoken aloud, predicted events before they occurred, and responded with intelligence and intent rather than mindless malice. Attempts to exorcise or confront it failed repeatedly, the preachers and locals finding themselves mocked or driven away by forces they could neither see nor touch. Each effort only seemed to confirm the witches, or whatever it was, absolute control over the house and its inhabitants. Rational explanations struggled to keep pace with the mounting horror. Skeptics argued that fear and rumor had exaggerated minor occurrences, a door closing on its own, the wind knocking branches against the windows, children's imagination turning shadows into monsters. But even these cautious observers could not deny the repeated physical evidence, the bruises, the slaps, the objects hurled through rooms as if by an unseen hand. Each incident defied logic in ways that left even the most rational minds unsettled. And yet, as we look back on these events from centuries away, the question remains: do you believe it was all hysteria, an overactive imagination compounded by isolation and fear? Or do you think something darker truly haunted the Bells? A malevolent intelligence that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or banished. Whatever you believe, the haunting reached a deadly end.
For years, the Bell Witch had spared no one in the family her cruel attentions. But it became increasingly clear that John Bell, the patriarch, was her ultimate target. She singled him out with a precision that was as terrifying as it was deliberate, calling him Old Jack in a tone both mocking and venomous. The name itself seemed to carry a weight of doom, a personal vendetta that no one could explain. As the weeks and months passed, John's strength began to wane under the relentless assault. Once a sturdy man, capable of managing the farm and guiding his family, he became a shadow of himself, his movements sluggish, his hands trembling, and his face etched with exhaustion and dread. The torment escalated in both subtle and violent ways. Objects flew at him when he walked through the rooms. Doors slammed in his face. Furniture would shift and block his path without human intervention. At night, he felt unseen hands clutch at his throat, pressing, choking, demanding attention from which he could not escape. The children would hide behind their mother's skirts, whispering prayers, while Lucy wept in the corner, powerless to shield her husband from this unrelenting force. Neighbors, though sympathetic, could do little. The witch seemed impervious to threats or intervention, her power growing stronger with each passing day. By Christmas of 1820, John Bell's health had deteriorated to the point that he was largely confined to his bed. It was on one of those cold, bleak mornings that Lucy discovered something truly alarming. The bottle of medicine she had prepared for him contained a strange black liquid, thick and pungent, unlike anything she had ever seen. Panic surged through her as she realized the implications. Someone or something had tampered with it. And then it happened. The witch's voice, unmistakable, reverberated through the house in triumph. "I gave old Jack the dose he needed," she crowed, a chilling blend of glee and finality that echoed through the walls. John gasped and convulsed, his body racked with pain as the poison or whatever force had been administered took hold. Betsy shrieked, and Lucy clutched at his hands, but it was too late. The man who had once been the foundation of the family lay lifeless, claimed by a force that defied explanation. What makes this story almost unthinkable is that it stands as one of the rare accounts in which a spirit is alleged to have caused an actual death. Scholars, skeptics, and believers alike have debated the circumstances for generations. Was it an elaborate ruse, a tragic coincidence, or did the Bell Witch truly have the power to reach beyond the veil of life itself? The chilling truth is that the events were witnessed, recorded, and spoken of by numerous individuals at the time, and the story persists as a cornerstone of American paranormal history. Even in death, the story did not end. The Bell Witch left behind more than sorrow. She left a promise. To the family, to the neighbors, and to anyone who dared question her might, she vowed that she would return. Her presence, though unseen, lingered in whispers, shadows, and the trembling memories of all who had witnessed her wrath. The Bell Witch was not finished, and the terror she inflicted would echo through generations.
After John Bell's death, the relentless attacks that had defined the Bell household gradually diminished, but they never fully ceased. The once constant slaps, scratches, and whispers grew less frequent, yet the sense of an unseen presence lingered in every corner of the farmhouse. Shadows seemed heavier, and the silence between creaks and sighs felt charged with anticipation, as if the Bell Witch were watching, waiting, never truly gone. Even after the family attempted to move past the trauma, the memories clung, shaping their lives in subtle, inescapable ways. Betsy Bell, who had endured so much as a child, carried the scars of the torment far into adulthood. Her experiences with the witch were not just physical, but psychological, shaping every relationship she formed. When a suitor came to court her, she broke off the engagement, unable to risk intimacy while haunted by the past. The whispers and shadows had left an indelible mark, and she would often speak to neighbors and visitors in hushed tones about the nights when unseen hands reached for her, pulling her hair, chilling her to the bone, and reminding her that the past never truly dies. Among the many stories told in hushed tones around Adams, one particular claim persisted. The witch had promised to return in 107 years. While some dismissed this as legend, others swore that the entity had kept her word, manifesting in unexplained phenomena for generations afterward. Whether truth or superstition, the story became woven into the fabric of the town itself, a tale told around fires and in local gatherings, growing darker and more compelling with each retelling. Today, modern-day Adams, Tennessee still bears the echoes of the Bell Witch's legacy. Tourists from across the country flocked to the area, drawn to the cave near the property where the entity was said to have made her lair. Visitors report eerie sensations, strange drafts, and in some accounts, voices whispering through the darkness. Some locals even claim that the witch's laughter can be heard on quiet nights, carried across the hills and valleys, a chilling reminder that the story is far from over. For those brave enough to approach the cave, a shiver runs down the spine before even crossing the threshold. The shadows seem to stretch unnaturally long, and the wind often carries whispers that seem to call your name. Some tourists recount the sensation of being touched by invisible fingers or hearing soft, mocking laughter just beyond their perception. It is an experience that leaves even skeptics unsettled, a tangible reminder that certain horrors refuse to remain buried. So, if you ever find yourself wandering through Adams or standing at the mouth of that fabled cave, consider this. Some locals swear they still hear voices inside. The Bell Witch may have faded from daily life, but she never truly left. Would you go in?
The Bell Witch was never truly gone. Her whispers lingered, her shadows haunted the hills of Adams, and her legacy became legend. So I ask you, do you believe it was a witch, a demon, or the darkest parts of human fear made flesh? Let me know your theories in the comments below. I read every one. And if you ever hear a voice whispering your name in the dark, don't answer. The Bell Witch might still be listening. For more true horror stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Grimora Stories and turn on the bell so you never miss a whisper from the past.
Grimora.